I guess I'm here in the Eastern Cape in my hometown now. So we are comfortable with Molweni. And what's the Afrikaans version? Goeiemiddag almal. So warm welcome, colleagues. Again, sincere appreciation to the team that facilitated and ran the earlier conversation. I do notice that there were moments when we did get a little bit hot under the collar, but that's okay. The key challenge for us, as the session reminded us of, is the importance of working hard at avoiding polarities. It's easier said than done. And so warm welcome to our next session. Very interesting and again challenging session for us as we contemplate the theme, an interesting new twist, the SDGs, African universities and emancipatory imaginations. And we hope to explore this topic with our two colleagues. Sadly, one of our colleagues was unable to make it. That is Benedict Mtasiwa. On the other hand, we have two amazing thinkers and scholars here on the podium. Firstly, allow me to introduce Su-ming Khoo. From the National University of Ireland. I was really pleased to get a wonderful introduction from her into the Irish university system. She has enormous strengths and capabilities in environment development and sustainability, and we hope that she is going to open up that conversation for us as to how we reimagine African universities in the context of the SDGs as a specific epiphenomenon. Then we're also joined by Winnie Mitullah from the University of Nairobi, from the Institute for Development Studies there. And you'll have noticed in the meeting pack, in the winter school pack, that she writes extensively on the subject of urban transport planning. As I introduced myself earlier this morning, my name is Ihron Rensburg. I'm associated with Nelson Mandela University, and I'm also a visiting professor at King's College in London. And those of you who are astute at picking up the news might have noticed that for my punishment, for my sins, as Ahmed put it, the minister has appointed me with effect from yesterday as the administrator at Vaal University of Technology. The key word for my punishment, that's not my language, that's from the CEO of Higher Education. Apologies, from the CEO of USAF. And so we're on time, colleagues, and I hope that up here on the podium that we would be able to stimulate some further reflection and conversation as was done this morning. I thought that I would remind us, or bring to mind at least, what Ndlovu Gacheni speaks of African universities' triple heritage. On the one hand, it's pre-colonial Africa, Nilotic, as in Nile, amongst others, Arabic, Muslim intellectual traditions, as I put it, that thrived and seemed to have reached its zenith during Europe's dark ages, that brought enlightenment and laid the foundations for Europe's own so-called Renaissance. And so that's the one part of this triple heritage. The second part of that triple heritage is our Western imperial colonial modernity. And of course the third part is the anti-colonial liberatory developmentalism, which of course has its ancestry certainly several decades ago. And as we saw in the period 2050 to 2017 here in South Africa, got reignited. Underroads must fall, but regrettably was quickly overrun by fees must fall, with a particular focus on the question of financial access to universities. I by no means, of course, suggest that it has run out of steam. I don't agree with my colleague who suggested that it has. And so that is what Ndlovagacheni reminds us of this triple heritage, and what I often refer to as a triple heritage which involves struggle and unity at the same time. And so what's the case and the struggle then for the African university, we may well ask, against that background? Again, drawing in part then on Ndlovagacheni, it seems the first task is to establish or re-establish Africa as a legitimate epistemic base from which Africans can understand and view the world. And we can do so by excavating and critically re-engaging our pre-colonial intellectual traditions. And I think as Africans, or at least Africans in the room, we must draw courage and confidence from those traditions. It does seem to me puzzling that we do not invest research and effort in excavating those traditions, as contradictory, as complex as they might have been, but also their contribution in real and definitive terms, as I indicated a moment ago, to Europe's own emergence from its dark ages. And it seems to me that is one of the arguments. The second seems to be that asserting a world in which knowledge also, and I use the word also, cascades from Africa to the world, and engaging in this unity and struggle of civilizations and of knowledges and epistemes. And picking up on the conversation earlier, we can do so through training the next generation of African professionals and thinkers, and through cross-disciplinary knowledge production, notably, I suggest, on key thematic questions and problems. It seems the third case, or the third question to be explored, is this detailed and complex decolonial, decentering and recentering process at personal, academic, and student and institutional levels. And finally, as we began to explore this morning, to critically engage the excellence, meritocracy, elite participation orthodoxy, and the so-called radical, deep, multiple, and simultaneous transformation heterodoxy. And all of this has to be done, as we learned this morning, at the same time, as we critically engage and work consciously with the other competing and complementary strands of the reproduction of economic, social, political, and cultural traditions, the grand African and global challenges, in this instance, the SDGs, institutional survival and sustainability, managerialism, commercialization, entrepreneurialism, academic capitalism, and the new pedagogies. Just reading earlier a piece that perhaps flipped classrooms might have turned out to be flippant useless, to online learning and so forth. And so then back to the SDGs that are now increasingly incentivized by financial aid, by research that seem to be pulling us into its direction, but also incentivized, you might have picked up, through a new ranking in the instance of Times Higher Education, that looks at the SDGs as a new means of assessing institutional impact. So what does this all mean? That's really then our reflection over the next hour and a half. It's really the interconnection between the emerging concepts and ideas about an African university, about these SDGs as an epiphenomenon, how to engage them, and this idea of imaginary emancipations. And so I begin, therefore, by asking Su-ming to kick off for us this conversation.
Is this working? If I can sit here rather than standing, because podiums are always much taller than me, and it's very awkward. So the title of the provocation that I just wanted to not spend too much time on, so give plenty of time for responses and conversation, is this idea of emancipation as rebellion or repair. And as you can see, I mean, the theme is to engage with the SDGs. But my starting point for engaging with SDGs is to just focus on two. The first I want to focus on is SDG 4, quality education. And what do we mean by quality? Educational quality. And SDG 10, reducing inequalities. The inequalities that matter, which are cognitive, or inequalities of dignity, distributive, inequalities of resources, and political, inequalities of representation. So I don't want to address these directly, because then it would be a very long lecture and also boring. So what I'd like to do is just to go on a little trip for the next 5 to 10 minutes. Yeah? So in this trip, 5, says Ihron, sternly. Okay, so he means business. So firstly, I really want to reject this SDGization. As I found this terrible kind of image of SDGs in Africa as a sort of pot, and then the SDGs were to be added to the pot and stirred into the pot as if there's some sort of African, sort of seasoning into an African stew. And this is just awful. I really thought this was nonsensical and ridiculous. So this is my anti-starting point. Okay, and the other second anti-starting point that I want to use is this idea of the, nostalgia for the modern education, including more and more people into mass education, because that's finished. And so that second image on the right is from Marchand and Meff's very beautiful elegiac essay, The Ruins of Detroit. It's an essay on the death of a certain kind of modernity, Fordist modernity. So we can't aspire to include more developing country education systems into modern education, because modern education is already this elegiac ruin. This is a technical high school, an actual picture of a technical high school in Detroit. So now just to come then to what this talk could be about, or this provocation could be about. And it's, well, if we are thinking about the crises, the different things that have been voiced this morning of higher education, to think about crises not only as bad things, but also as opportunities. Crises are really important, as Janet Reutman says, because they lay bare the normative foundations of what we are talking about. And in laying bare these normative foundations, I want to raise that question and bring it to the fore for us to share and sip from this idea of transformative higher education or transformable higher education. What is there in higher education that is transformable and potentially transformative? And then the theme of the provocation then, rebellion or repair. Which type of emancipation are we looking at? At the very center then, an image generated by the Chinese artist in exile, Ai Weiwei, dropping a Han Dynasty urn, a work of art from the mid-1990s. So a Han Dynasty urn is not the sort of thing that one generally drops. If you are given one to hold, you try not to drop it because it's about 2,000 years old. But if you're a provocative artist who wants to ask questions about what is China, where is it going, he drops the Han Dynasty urn. So is this where we are? Are we dropping the urn? Or the image on the bottom right-hand side, which is a much humbler type of art. And this is the Japanese art of kintsugi, the art of golden repair. When a thing is broken, it can be repaired. So if you drop the Han Dynasty urn, you could restore it. It wouldn't be the same as what it was when it was dropped. You would repair it carefully, honoring each shard, bringing back into wholeness its function as a vessel, but enjoying the repair. Hence, they repair with gold. And the repaired object is more beautiful than the object before it was broken. It's a really interesting concept. And I came to this through the work of the Algerian artist Kader Attia, who has done many installations on works concerning the repair from non-Occidental cultures, to the Occident. So he's interested in decolonizing the mind, using artworks, using experiences which ruminate and think about the problem of brokenness, the need for repair, and the honoring of repair, and how repairing the visage of the face that is broken. So he started with the faces of World War I's veterans, whose faces had been blown up. And this was a terrible kind of realization for modernity, that modernity had outstripped itself by developing that technology to destroy the very face of humanity. And so he decided to create artworks of that as a way to think about decolonization, repair, and the relationships between the Occident and itself, and between the Occident and non-Occidental cultures. Okay, so that's so kintsugi repair, and do I have a minute? By the grace of the chair, to think about the shards and what is there in the non-Occidental realm that could help repair the brokenness of Western universities, which are where I live and work and make my life. So I could have put a University of Bologna picture there, but I decided not to. I thought instead of Bologna, I would use Al-Azhar University, a university of comparable antiquity, but Islamic university, but also to think about two other ancient universities, the University of Taxila, which is in present-day Pakistan, and the University of Nalanda in present-day Bihar in India, because these universities were originated in the Axial Age, what Karl Jaspers called the Axial Age, 2 millennia ago, and really came about in the time when the spiritual dimension of thirst for learning had run ahead of the expansion of political economy. So in fact, the kings and emperors were extremely good at expanding, creating wealth, and becoming rich and powerful. But these universities were exemplars in developing a question about the purpose of learning. So Taxila was where it's associated with Kautilya, yeah, and the beginning of the Guptan Empire dynasty. And this is an administrator who sought to bring purpose to rule. He wrote the famous treatise called Artha Sastra. Purpose, Artha, the different purposes humanity could have. Sastra, science, the purpose of sciences. And then Nalanda, the Dalai Lama's imagined university. This is what the Dalai Lama studied, combining the curriculum of the inner arts and sciences, which are everything that you would call Buddhism, I suppose, yeah? Which are imagination, logic, philosophy, psychology, and visioning, with the outer arts and sciences like medicine, jurisprudence, governance. I'm sure Satish can give you the full curriculum there. Okay, so why am I talking about these? Because these are the treasures that were in the ruins that were still alive when the Dalai Lama decided what curriculum he wanted to study. And they're still there today in the kind of collective wisdom that is there for us to repair in both its senses. Repair as in mending, bringing back to wholeness, honoring, and repair as in a kind of a journey in our mind from the non-Occidental, non-Western cultures to Western cultures, for these were higher education institutions that asked what education was for and why it would be higher. What would be higher about that? So that's just a provocation anyway. There's lots of other things that we could talk about. But I think I'll just hand over now to the next.
Thank you very much. As I sit and walk in between my discussants of Su-ming and giving my reflection, I'll go on with first just one comment about conceptualization. And it's the port, it's about the port, the African port there with the SDGs rolling in. I wonder how many are in that bracket. I'm not, because I'm trying to reflect on the different lenses that we have used in development over a period of time. Whether we begin from the basic needs approach, we went into social dimensions of development, then we went into PRSPs, poverty reduction strategies, then we went into MDGs, then we went to now SDGs. Almost, look at that. It's almost 4 decades. You have to be old to remember that. So, or you have to be a very good historian or development studies person. But basically what I'm trying to say is that this topic is calling on us to put ourselves as academicians in the middle of this debate, because you have the SDGs, then you have what we are calling emancipatory imagining, then we have African universities. So if I put those 3 together, what I want to see is, if I take a development perspective, development will be going on, irrespective of whether universities are there or not. I don't know what will drive them then, but development will go on, whether universities are there or not. And that's what has been happening. But what we are trying to say, as scholars, can we shape what's going on in development? And I think that's a connection since morning that we are trying to get, so that we are able to link learning, pedagogy, critical thinking with what's going on in society. But society tends to be running ahead of us. So we are very concerned about that delinking. And as we continue to try to link it up, when you look at what's going on with SDGs, I think they provide an opportunity. They provide an opportunity. The issue is, how does African university tap into that opportunity? And I think one positive thing this time with SDGs, which is very different from all those other, programs I've mentioned, whether they were social dimensions or MDGs, is that this particular one, the debates and the voices were there. How many of you participated? You are all scholars here. How many participated in any platform, either by writing a paper or by being convened either in Europe or Pretoria. For Africa, it was Pretoria. How many of you participated in the development of these parameters? How many? Yeah, that's a very good thing to see that there is no participation. But if we were to take more numbers, because we are few in this room, we will find out that there are many scholars and very, very serious scholars who participated in conceptualizing, students who participated, especially those who are working in the areas of development. So again, when you look at that, the opportunity has always been there, but I think it's now how we use this framework of critical thinking, to get it there when at the right time. Because in development, sometimes if you don't get there at the right time, you will not be able to contribute. So we may be sitting and very keen to contribute towards development that is going on through SDGs, but we don't have a forum. So having a forum can be very critical. Let's look at, like, for example, where I see again there is a gap. When you look at how development operates, even if you look at just the bureaucracy, the way the bureaucracy operates and how you want to tap into it, the right critical thinking and learning that can change the world, seem to be very different from our environment of academic discourse. So that gap creates a problem that when you look at what's happening in Africa today, you will be questioning what's going on, even with the leadership, like we were doing in the morning. But I think it is a matter of maneuvering, and I think this approach of critical studies can help us to maneuver our way around, because of course the political economy of development puts Africa in a disadvantaged position. But I don't think we want to sit and accept that disadvantaged position and mourn over it. It's how do you contribute in that discourse? Even if we take the global political economy today, how can we as African universities, get into that terrain, be it our students or scholars, so that out of it, something can happen, so that we stop what the synonym that was displayed there, so that the SDGs, the 17 SDGs do not just pour into Africa and then Africa consumes them, whether they are consumable or not. I think that, to me, has been my struggle. And whenever I can, I would try. I know we don't always make it, but somehow we need to be training students, producing graduates who can begin to engage with what's happening on the ground. Because sometimes if you just take a linear way, like the polarities will always remain. You started by the preamble of polarities. I don't think we will ever deal with polarities. They will be there. But how you maneuver within polarities so that you have your advantage within is what then becomes very important. When it comes to SDGs, again, I think framing these SDGs has been very problematic, especially when it comes to issues like indicators. At least targets were easy. We were able to get the 167 targets, but the indicators has been very problematic. I'm not even sure how many they are, whether they are 300 or 250. People keep giving different ones, because I think indicators is not something you can do at a global level. This issue of globalizing everything up to indicators can be very problematic, because what an indicator in Africa might be very different from an indicator elsewhere. So I don't think we can also have indicators that cut across per se, but they have to be unique to context. And I think context matters, and this is where Africa stands unique, whether it's in scholarship, context matters. Our context is very different from other contexts. But again, the issue of science, technology, and innovation, very critical in the debate that we are having. And I think that's again where we come in as universities, because it is the major driver. The science, technology, and innovation is the driver of innovations. And innovations is what is needed in the SDGs. So if we are not producing graduates who are innovative and have the right technology, or gadgets, whatever you want to call it, if you don't want to use the word technology, that can then change things moving forward, then you don't go very far. And again, the concepts. There are many concepts that are very wavy and very difficult to deal with, even in the debate of SDGs. When we talk about resilience, we talk about sustainability. These words are very complex and need to be operationalized at the local level. And this localization of concept, I think, is where we again struggle. Because if we don't participate when the globe is coining these words, and when all these global parameters are done by our governments. Governments are the ones who go and sign all these things and bring them back and then turn around and blame us for not supporting them to achieve them. So the thing is, we need to also find space in engaging with those parameters before it's too late. Sometimes I have a friend who says that academicians wait to be consulted or to be commissioned, but probably we need to be proactive. But that debate is also neither here or there. In fact, the think tanks, the question I was asking in the morning about think tanks and about these other people who are so active, including civil society outside university, sometimes the debate is how do we work with them? But for me, I think they are intermediaries, and they are doing a very good job of bridging. But sometimes now the African university, beginning to get even more confused, now wants to go there and be the intermediary again. And I think somebody made a comment here. I think our moderator, you did indicate that we are meant to train. And I think if we concentrate in that training and imparting the right pedagogy and knowledge, then we are able to produce students who are able to engage with development issues out there. But the fact that the new measures, the neoliberal measures require us to go and do it. So you are being asked, how are you connected to the market? How are you linked to partners? So the university graduate or the university don is trying to do some things beyond even their capacity to engage. So I think the debate on the SDGs brings us back to just questioning at what point do we begin and at what point do we stop as universities? Is it enough just to produce a graduate and stop there, or after producing this graduate, do we as scholars who are not students have any role to play in development? Or can we only play that role through think tanks or through civil society or through other entities and not the African university? What can the African university do beyond just imparting knowledge to students? I think that area is very gray and is a debate that cannot be wished away. Last but not least, before I end, I think definitions is an issue. Definitions, even when we talk about SDGs. Definitions, be it of indicators, issue of disaggregated data. I know in 2015 we went to Addis Ababa. We came up with the big data. What that big data means to Africa today, we are still questioning, some of us. We talk about big data, go do research, you won't even get small data. It doesn't exist. So the big data in itself makes a lot of sense depending on which context you are located or where you are coming from. Intersectionality. I think that is another big issue, intersectionality. These SDGs, they are 17. There is a lot of intersectionality there, but we are not yet engaging with that element of intersectionality within SDGs. We are reporting, the annual reporting in New York requires you to report on each of the 17, but they are very difficult. You cannot look at them in isolation and make sense of them. So I think that's another area that we can really get into. Last and not least, finance. I wanted to put it last because I hate to say that resources is a problem for Africa. We have no resources, so we can't do anything. So you say it last. Resources is an issue for sure, but we can mobilize resources and do the much we can, so long as we are clear on what our mandate is and where it stops. If Africa wants to only get the right pedagogy, critical pedagogy to students and stop there, let's perfect it and stop there. If we also want to now to be the agencies out there influencing development and the SDGs, that's another goal that we must design how to do. Thank you.
So colleagues, there we have it. Rebellion or golden repair. So two views have been expressed on how we intersect with the SDGs, as African universities. And we've got about 35 minutes to really explore this question and to bring the best wisdom in the room to bear on this conversation. And so I'll invite colleagues to signal your interest in entering the fray.
Thanks, Chair. Luzuko Puku from Krishet. I think I'm more inclined to agree with the logic of a rebellion. Particularly because I believe that we should start to think about moving or approaching transformation of higher education beyond mere formalism. By mere formalism, I mean the SDGs. In South Africa, it's even worse. In South Africa, there is the Bill of Rights and various other pieces of legislation that go beyond the SDGs. But problematic practices happen in our universities. So it means that in my view, we don't need to say we are going to approach transformation by merely adapting these SDGs or better interacting with them. The reality is that universities speak about them, they are accepted in mere formalism, Bill of Rights are quoted from the ministry downwards, universities, Council on Higher Education, all institutions, but problematic practices exist. Now it means that you need some decisive shift in the institutions themselves, which will brew this transformative project. So the idea of fracturing something in order to properly rebuild it is very, very comfortable to me. Because if you think about the purpose of the university, it's easy to define it in South Africa. But the reality is the university in South Africa doing what is said to be its purpose? So that's the fundamental question, and I don't think that the SDGs, as they prevail, they will provide us a basis for pursuing that project. Thanks.
Thank you very much for the perspectives. For me, for the last almost 3 years now, more than 3 years, I have been working at the grassroots level with SDGs. And as an academic who has been spending more time among the underprivileged and those who don't have any voices in the margins, seeing on the cold face of what development means or underdevelopment means, I find it really, in a sense, humbling that when people tell me that I have to go and build capacity, I find that's absolutely stupid, because you cannot build capacity for those people who already have a capacity. You can learn about the capacity and try and make a sense of the SDGs. So what I've done is I've used SDGs basically in terms of the broken approach to the SDGs to say, can I refix this SDGs to make sense for the communities? And even when I went with a group of my colleagues across the world and from India as well, we found that people had a preconceived notion that we are here to tell them what to do. And I think we cannot tell them what to do. We have to learn what they have already done. And I think you can reorganize, reformulate the SDGs based on your commitment. And I think I come back to the point that you need to have a political commitment to the communities that you're engaging with. If you're just using it as a rhetoric, then it's no use. And I would say that, it all matters if you have a commitment for it.
Do you want to illustrate by way of example how you did it?
Yes, in terms of my first engagement, this is one of the largest inhabited river island in the world outside of the Amazon. And their communities have been in existence for 450 years. They have dealt with issues of flooding, recurrent flooding, every year. So I was trying to figure out what is the traditional knowledge systems they have by which they were able to avoid drowning in the recurrent floods. And I found that, when I went there, I asked them, are you scared of the floods? And they said, no. We welcomed the floods. Well, the rest of the Europe, rest of the world were thinking, poor chaps, they're getting swamped by the floods. So we started working with them to understand what is the sort of cultural heritage that they have by which they are able to build up a social, cultural, community resilience to deal with those questions. And in exploring that, I was able to find answers to the SDGs. I can't say that all the SDGs are connected, and I would agree with Winnie and Sue, that the SDGs are interconnected. We cannot extricate one for the other. But I can't handle it all by myself. I can have to pick and choose what I can do. So there is a social responsibility that I have as an academic. And I think I'd come back to what Chris said, that the responsiveness to a global challenge is what I'm addressing. Because by myself, I feel, and I remember talking to my dean and the vice chancellor at one point of time, that I have a social commitment to where I come from, to India. So even though I may write papers in American journals and others, I still have to go back to the people. And that's my response to your response.
Thank you. There are certain things that are coming up here. It's from the first one that where all of this is putting it out, perhaps trying to articulate it where it's about marginality. Data, Africa, in relation to this big.
Just check if the mic's on.
Yep. So there's a theme of marginality. And then there were other themes from earlier on that were picked up around producing intelligentsia, for instance. So what are university training students for? One of the questions that keeps me really awake in the context of global higher education is PhDs without jobs. I mean, that's a big question. So when I sit with my students, about 12 PhD students and master students, and I'm training them, and I'm sitting and I'm creating this environment for them. I'm thinking, well, they're gonna get this PhD, I think I'm a good teacher, or perhaps they might disagree, a supervisor, but where are they gonna get the jobs? I mean, that's a big question that you start to think about then, about what are universities teaching for, what are they for, and it's a big question. And then it applies to these two other questions that perhaps again we can draw on from earlier on about, and I'm not being provocative when I say this, what are vice chancellors for? What are deans for? And so I like this panel because earlier on we started with the current vice chancellor, a former vice chancellor, and somebody who works at the system at that level. So to bring it down then to the level of deans, to head of departments, to professors, what are we for? What do we do, given all these constraints, these discursive frames? What do we do? You graduate, you get on the Facebook or Twitter, my student has a PhD, my master's student has a cum laude. But really, if you're not thinking about both the tensions within the university, because you could have a wonderful space where you do decolonial work or innovation, if you're at UJ, Fourth Industrial Revolution, but if you don't do this other work that just steps outside of the boundaries of the university, that steps outside of the boundaries of South Africa, and see that you'd have all of these students coming into the university, 1 million plus, and then you'd increase the numbers of doctoral students and master students. But what are you doing it for? I mean, that's a really big question that perhaps we have to surface again, because if we talk at the level of the university and not talk about what happens inside of the university, we might be not doing the sort of work that we need to be doing.
Yeah, thank you to the members of the panel, and especially also to Su-ming and Winnie, Mitullah. I have questions to both of you. Thank you also for bringing a different kind of imaginary to the discussion of university in regard to thinking about the history of universities from a different angle. And it brings the question actually of curriculum. I mean, I'm speaking here from Europe, where we don't teach this kind of history, where Bologna is the point of reference, where the notions of university start with Middle Ages in Europe, and the previous history is forgotten. So thank you for bringing this in. And one question that still remains in all the questions about decolonizing the university is what's happening on the level of curriculum, and how is this actually implemented, or are we experiencing rather a way of destroying again what has been brought up? No? Which is not even the question of rebellion and repair, it's the question of destruction and oppression. I mean, I'm talking now from a European angle. So I was also wondering about your point that you made at the margins about it's not about the mass university or thinking about mass university, and I would like you to elaborate this more in order to understand, because in regard to let's put just Germany, where I'm based, there are also questions of privatizing the university, bringing in fees, no? And also in the Netherlands, there were debates about how to, and student strikes also against fees, no? So what do you, just to explore that part. And to Winnie, I also like very much the thinking through the hierarchical system in which we are in universities, on the level of participation, where decision making takes place, where consultations takes place. In regard to the SDG, within my kind of context, I can't remember that has been a public debate in the German society or on the level of the university. We have big debates in Germany at the moment. There have been 11 universities or 12 universities have been made excellence university. So we have a lot of debates about how to become part of the global ranking of universities. We don't have any debates about SDG, even on the level of formal indexes, on the formal of how to get rid with social inequalities, how exclusion is produced, and so on. So it's quite interesting to think about this level of participation, and so I would like you to elaborate on it. And within this context also the goal that you mentioned, goal 12, which is intersectionality, because also intersectionality can become kind of how do you say, a buzzword, where we mean queers, we mean feminists, disabilities, but in all this participation happening, in all these committees, we see that this is not happening. I've never been part, personally, I hardly been asked to be part of these committees. So.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Michael Cross. I want to be provocative again, like before. And let me thank you for your insightful inputs. I think as scholars, especially here, we've been very good in developing strategic plans, developing indicators, even looking at the SDGs and all that. I think that's a domain that we've been very good. Not as good in being critical to these instruments. And worse, in one dimension that we haven't addressed in our discussion. I was listening to the Chief Justice, South African Chief Justice. It's a person that I really admire. He's a role model for me. And he was explaining how he's been trying to fix the legal profession in the country. And I think that one domain which is critical that he alluded to is leadership, which goes with governance. And together with that is the normative framework that we're using. So if we're going to assess the significance of this set of SDGs, I think we have to look at it with reference to what they can do for us, or what they're doing. And if that's the case, then we should not forget that they will only work if we can make people involved, the key actors,
accountable, responsible, and that there is political will. So this is a domain that we're not really touching, and that's our major problem in the country and across the continent, is leadership and the normative framework to make sure that those people driving this process to implement the SDGs are accountable. I think that's, I'm just flagging that dimension.
Thank you. Really following up on what Michael's bringing up, as critical scholars in higher education, the reason why Andre and I followed up the first roundtable with this series of questions is that the SDGs are supposedly an incredible resource, and a huge amount of funding is going into this. And South Africa and its position in the continent means that it's incredibly attractive to a whole lot of international donors, and possibly may reproduce some of the issues of colonialism and imperialism on the continent if there isn't enough thinking about the ways in which this framework is operating. Higher education has been put as the key driver of the SDGs. And if we're not studying the ways in which that's done, just knowing how academics are schooled by funding, there's a real concern there. The other concern, I guess, for those of us who are worried about higher education institutions as places of unequal participation, as institutions of potential violence, is can higher education institutions be drivers of the SDGs when they themselves do not necessarily embody the values of those SDGs? So I really love a comment on that.
Thanks very much. And this is really an extension of exactly this point. And I wonder whether we, in looking forward and into mechanisms for thinking about what we should be, whether we take seriously or whether we've considered seriously enough the reasons why these things don't want to shift. Have we considered seriously enough the contours of power that characterize this higher education landscape? There are systems which hold this landscape in place. There are large vested interests in the current arrangement of things, whether they be publishers or academics, or remembering that universities are themselves social institutions. There is cultural, there is economic, there is social currency in these things, and the way in which they operate currently serves particular sets of people. And I think unless we understand how the current arrangement serves a particular class of person or different classes of person, we're never going to really understand what it is that we're up against when it comes to, well, this project will be scuttled before it even starts. And so I wonder if we're thinking in this imaginary, kind of what the interface between what is and what could be, what that actually looks like. Because it looks like struggle, right? It's not going to give easily. You know, it's not going to give itself up easily. And so, yeah, my question is always around, why is it so stubbornly, where is the site of resistance, and do we understand the nature of that resistance, where that resistance lies, what it looks like in detail, not just as an abstract concept. Yeah. Thanks.
So, let me say thank you to the two of you. I think that's interesting. And I think, there's a discussion going on at USAF at the moment in the Transformation Strategy Group, which Andre is in, where we're talking about basically saying we can't leave things to chance. That we can't just simply say, we've got this policy, let's now kind of see how it plays out. But rather to kind of to try and understand what the role of design is, in making progress with big challenges that we face. So I want to say, that it's not enough for us to say, that there are power structures within the universities and so on. But I think the big question for me is say, well, how do we intervene? How do we kind of give the university the kind of the skills and all of that to really make decisive changes where we think that those are important? Okay. And I just want to say, I think back to the 1980s and 90s, just in particular the 80s. And I was at the University of Natal at the time, and so just one little detail, that there were 87 centers of research outside of the faculty structures, right? Because these were all like anti-apartheid kind of structures, anti-apartheid. So, people just didn't sit back and say, Senate is not approving and so on. They just kind of established things, I think about the impact of the trade unions strikes, in 73, 74 on the nature of that university in the years that followed that, with Rick Turner and company. So I think there's a need for us to understand that, the universities don't belong to vice chancellors. They don't belong to councils. They are social institutions, and I think that we have to kind of really work the system, like to get stuff done. I think.
No, it's just a follow-up from what she was saying. I hear, Prof, you talking about powers, but universities have powers. And it's not formal powers, if I can put it like that. And there's also the institutional culture. There's sometimes the misnomer or misconception that the culture is driven by the VC. And the reality is that it's not driven by the VC. I normally talk about the politics of the stomach. You find that within the system, and the funny thing, senior management is a 5-year contract. You exit, and you have a wonderful 20, 30, 40 vision. By the time you exit, you haven't even implemented what the vision is about. But that's another story. But again, if you look into the stomach of the university, those are the people who have a memory of the institution. Those are the people who have been there 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And those are the people who are actually enabling this transformation from taking place. And we are not sensitizing ourselves from those people. And I must use the word of language. There's also the use and the abuse of language in higher education. And those people have the power of writing the most beautiful epistemology, pedagogy, ontology, you name it. And when you get a report, I talk with Bladen Zimande, and he said, Brightness, everything is going well. But if you look at the report and you reflect on what you are experiencing, it's two different things. But again, now I'm asking myself, is it the VC that is the problem? Or is it the people that are the problem? So I'm also attracted into this dropping this dynasty. Somewhere, somehow it says, it's not working. It's not working. And when we look into the marginalized, the university, the majority is patriarchy, it's white. And if we are talking about the culture, who defines the culture? Are these people who are already in the system? If you try to penetrate the system, you are reminded that you are not part of the system. So you are frustrated into the point of saying, you know what? It's either I fight or I move out of the system. And it's always easier to move out of the system.
Well put. I just want us to remember the theme for this conversation, if we could just pull it back. I'm not saying that we're not having good conversation. We are sipping, right? Kodwa. We have a topic that we are seeking to delve in, that we're seeking to excavate, that we're seeking to explore. I'm just reminding us for the last 3 or 4 speakers. What was that about the stomach?
Okay, thank you for the good conversation that's going around. And I think my contribution to this debate lies in the context of who is involved in setting these goals, who implements them, who monitors to ensure that we are achieving what we are supposed to achieve, up to and including measurement. And the challenge to all of us in Africa is that this, we have left it to the politicians, to a large extent, who have, who, when you talk to them, I happen to work a lot in terms of policy engagement with the politicians. And when you talk to them, they tell you whatever your research you are doing in the university is not speaking to me. Even if you are writing this or that, for me the political priority is this or the other. So what you think is a priority and what you think you are trying to measure with your SDG framework and all that is not the priority that I'm implementing. But then, who is devoting resources for implementation of those goals? It is the politician. So we've got to take the conversation as higher education institutes who are the intellectual agents to start asking ourselves, how do we get into serious engagement to see that we influence the policy direction, and much more, the kind of evidence that we generate is also incorporated within the whole thinking. I think that is the only way we will be able to make systematic and institutional change. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi. Yeah, I think actually what I want to say has really been said in the last few comments. But it's about really what you were saying, Dina. It's about, we can't, I think, criticize the goals. We can criticize the potential for some of them to be contradictory with each other, economic growth, environmental degradation. We can criticize whether we can achieve them all at the same time. But overall, I doubt anyone would ever have any problem with the SDGs. It's more about the big concern that they are within a global structure, and so they have the potential, we already heard, the way that they're being used as a ranking mechanism. We know that at the moment they're great because we can get money. We can get money to do all sorts of stuff. There's a load of money to get the SDGs happening, but with money come all sorts of ties, and I think increasingly we're going to see only people who are willing to do things in certain ways can get that money. And we're sitting in South Africa about to face structural adjustment programs as we hit junk status. And so these things are not separate. Even the good things in a particular structure can be problematic. And the classic example, of course, is that we all want money to do these all things. The money's in the global north. You land a big EU project. You're very, very happy about landing a big EU project. It's lots of money. But the EU will write that they've given this aid, development aid to South Africa. And we know that about 60% of the money is actually paid in salaries to the academics in the global north, sometimes 75%, but between 60 and 70. So basically, out of this huge amount of money that will be reported at a national global level of aid to Africa, most of it is sustaining present structures. I'm not saying anything new. I'm just saying that when we look at things like the SDGs, which are fantastic, and we've got to get behind them, but they happen within pre-existing structures, some of which are highly unequal.
Cool, I'm going to sneak you in.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to really just push Professor Mitullah a little bit more to speak about. I like the idea of localizing the targets and the indicators and driving towards that which a university can do, understanding the mandate and stopping where your mandate ends. But the question I want to pose is, in the South African context, where some institutions' mandate is specifically to respond to the issue of massification and teaching and learning, and not so much that which enables the university to gain in the kind of resources that are needed to effectively respond to the issues of SDGs.
And doing so within the context, and the issue of the stomach, the politics of the stomach is real. Some of the institutions, I'll even go to their point of saying, are actually captured by certain groupings or interest groups that have a different agenda rather than allowing the university to be responsive to addressing societal issues or the challenges that the country, the continent, and the rest of the globe requires us to be. So how do we meander? How do we put this together so that we can see ourselves responding to some of the SDGs? Not all 17, but at least if we can do 10, that's good enough. Thank you.
I thought you were going to say 3. And I'm going to invite our 2 panelists now. We've got about 6 minutes. Maybe 3 is fair, right?
Shall I go first? Yeah. Okay. So I think it's impossible to answer to all of the things that have been raised, but just it's an amazing pot of beer that we have here, yeah? Because every time somebody raises something, the pot doubles in size. So we will be sipping for a long time. But it's really this issue of doing SDGs in a situation of really existing unsustainable inequalities. Yeah. That's really, we keep talking about structural problems or, problematic practices and problematic this, and let's just name it. It's really in existing, the really nature of real existing, what is unsustainable, unbearable. What is breaking society and breaking our solidarity is the amount of inequality that there is. So it's this, how do we situate SDGs, and it's not a surprise that they buried SDG 10 in this forest of other SDGs, because they thought if we put them in the middle, nobody will remember what number 10 is, reducing inequalities. So I think that is really the one that we need to take out of the middle of the stew and to really look at it much more carefully in sense of what is every indicator, every target, every goal, every conversation. What is it doing to reduce inequalities? So I think that's really all I want to say. I mean, there are lots of other things that I could respond to, but I'll try and do that individually.
Economy of global development, a lot that will remain with us. It's like our long-term engagement. But within that long-term engagement, we have to be doing other things. And we are asking, what is it that we can do? And that's why I like the point of refixing, the comment about working with grassroots. That's the kind of thing that is needed now. And again, looking forward, because we were clear that MDGs were coming to an end in 2015. And we could, by then we were doing a lot of research. All of us are doing all sorts of research. Today, if you look at all the calls, anybody who is addressing any call today, look at that call is aligned to SDGs. Why can't we then be looking forward to the extent that we are already carving what we'll put in 2028? For those who will be alive, it won't be a matter of 2030. They begin it 2 years, 3 years before they come up with another word altogether. I don't know what it will be in 2030. So we need now to use the research we are doing at the moment, whether they are student-generated research. There are times when people think student-generated research is not research. That's really research. Let's cumulate this as academicians so that at the end of the day, we are ready in 2028 with the new parameter so that we can count ourselves in and not see ourselves as outsiders. Then the issue of tension of marginality and producing intelligentsia and all this. I know there is no time to stop thinking for us as academicians. We will always be on the radar. But it's what we do with our thinking and critical and pedagogies that is being questioned. Everybody is questioning what our role in society is. And because it's being questioned, it means there is a problem. So we need to do something. For those that are already contributing in one way or the other, that's really a great score. Intersectionality was a specific question. I think many times when we talk about intersectionality is used in gender discourse, but I think it can be used elsewhere as well. And if you look, for example, gender, goal 5, you can't see that in isolation. Look at climate change. You can't see it in isolation. It's literally cutting across. So I think it's that, kind of interactivity across different goals, which, when it comes to practice, is being handled, they are being handled in isolation. So I think we have a role as, scholars to contribute to that element. It's never easy, this intersectionality element, so that, because people work in silos. In development, people are in silos. I'm in education sector, so I work in education. So each one of them is working in silo. And for example, in Africa, the biggest problem is coordinating all these silos to make the holistic contribution for the continent. So that can be our role. We can make a contribution in that hard. It's a hard task to come up with a mechanism that sees this broader picture which has linkages, but not just a linear approach. I think I have just the one last one, which was on can universities, I think I've handled it. Okay, the maneuver. I think that was the last one, which was very specific. Thank you. I'll stop
Thanks
there.
very much. Warm round of applause to the colleagues. So, colleagues, there we have it. We've had some really good conversation, good contributions, and I guess it's still out there, isn't it? Repair, golden repair, or drop the urn. Okay. What was the word that you used again? Rebellion. Rebellion, or drop the urn and let's fix the urn. Yeah, so thank you very much. I think we've had lots of food for thought about these SDGs, about their history, their setting in a 40, 50-year history. And of course, the big question still remains, which is this formalism, SDGs just going through the motions again? Or is this about deep, substantive transformation? So let's continue to ponder over that over the 15-minute tea break. So thank you very much. Enjoy the tea break. Thank you.